Moving on. AJ Balahado. Sorry, there's Mr. Servino. We've been ignoring you. I'm gonna drop this question down to you. What is your position on exporting convicts back to their countries?
Okay, it's a very controversial issue right now, but my position is just like the governor's position. If you committed a crime, I think you need to be held accountable for it. And I think we need to work with the federal government in addressing this issue, and also our island partners in the Federated States. Their leaders need to help us in addressing these issues, because the cost of, again, recidivism in the DOC, as you look at it, is really astronomically high. We need to cut those costs, and it's just overbearing for our government. We really need to cut those costs. And again, focusing on accountability. If you commit a crime, you really need to be held accountable for it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. AJ Balahadra, what's your position on extraditing or commuting sentences for convicts?
Well, it's no secret that I've given 32 years of my life to the Guam Police Department, and I've seen my share of violent crimes. The Chukis community is less than 1/3% of the population of Guam, but yet they are number one in alcohol-related offenses. They are also number two in overall violent arrest in our community. So I do support having these individuals be given the option to return home if they choose to do so. But I also support the fact that they should have due process. They should be represented by an attorney. They should have the same rights given to them as we are given. They are our guest, and I think that the U.S. government needs to step up and help us. And I'd like to open dialogue with the FSM community or the FSM government, and perhaps helping cover the shortfalls that the U.S. government is failing to do for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Senator Tina William-Barnes. Same question. What's your position on extradition of the convicts back to their countries?
With the extradition, the governor can commute sentences. Deportation is a federal program, and they should get involved. And they finally stepped up to the plate after many, many years of being silent on this issue. I think the important thing is to do is that if we can save the resources from having to spend the money at DLC and keeping them in there, I could take that money and use it for education, to use it to promote tourism, to literally pay for and give the additional to the teachers that need the resources. I'm going to say that if the governor has the authority based on the Organic Act, and I agree with the Attorney General, commuting and deporting are two different things. Giving the opportunity for them to go back because the commuting was given, those monies that should have been spent in staying, being housed at DLC, could be used for other government functions that could help, like education.
Interesting, thank you. I'm sorry, Speaker. It's by lottery. It's by lottery. I understand, but I do apologize. We're going to actually offer Therese Terlahi the opportunity to address this issue. What's your position on exporting convicts back to their country or island?
Well, I think the base of the issue really is crime on Guam, right? Which remains an issue with deportation of criminals or not. I think we really need to address crime, and that is what the public wants. And I think this deportation sounds like it's going to help us decrease crime, and I don't think that that's based on, it's possible that it decreases repeat offenders, but I'm not sure if it really is a deterrent. It hasn't been proven to be a deterrent, this deportation. And
if I could interrupt you real quick, I believe the issue is the financial burden on the government of Guam. So
Well, yes, I'm getting to that. So yes, so one issue is crime. I mean, is it going to help us with crime, and is it going to help the government of Guam save costs? Obviously, we can take all our prisoners and send them, give them tickets, commutate all their sentences, give them tickets, send them off island, and it should save us money if we could enforce that and prevent them truly from coming back and being a burden on us or something like that, right? But those are policies that really just don't exist anywhere. I mean, actually, Guam, has to be very careful because, there are policies that we have to follow. And if we follow them, then yes, then I have no objection to that. But I think we need to follow the policies that exist or create policies so that everybody's treated the same way, fairly, right? And that we know what to expect. And if it's to be a deterrent, that it actually serves that purpose so everybody knows what the policy is. And the other thing is, I just think Guam has to be very careful with this whole philosophy of deporting people, because we have been the place where people want to deport their criminals, their homeless people, and we just have to have our own.
Thank you. Sorry,
Be ready to
but
react
thank
to
you.
that.
Senator Dennis Rodriguez, what is your position on extradition or commuting sentences of convicts?
Well, I support what the governor is doing in deporting these convicted criminals, and I don't just limit that support to just the FSN nationals. I think if you are a non-U.S. citizen, you commit a crime, and the way, at least as I understand the process that's being done now, is that they're looking at these convicts that are in the system now, that perhaps their sentence are coming up within a year or so, and that those people are being offered this arrangement. So I do support it. I know the burden that's being placed on the Department of Corrections, and the intent of this is to relieve some of that burden, especially when it is the federal government who must take on the responsibility in addressing this problem. So I do support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Luis Munoz, what are your thoughts on commuting sentences of criminals?
I support the governor's decision to export criminals as being a part of the Public Safety Division at the Lieutenant Governor's Office. I work very closely with the Public Safety Division and Department of Corrections, and I see how that agency is really overcrowded. What I do know is now that he has implemented this and he has started this process, it's opened up a lot of eyes to a lot of other agencies, and a lot of the federal government and the local government now need to start collaborating together to put together a structure so that what we can do moving forward now is to develop something where the criminals, maybe it can deter some of those criminals before they get into DOC, or maybe now the federal government can start stepping in.
Thank you. Mr. Fred Burdett, same question. What's your position on extradition of convicts back to their country?
Thank you. It's been discussed already. The Guam Attorney General came out with some concerns about commutation, because there's a difference between commutation and deportation. The federal government must assist our government in terms of if there's violent criminals that are non-U.S. citizens or they pose a security risk, even in the Homeland Security arena. There's moves, or the national security arena, there's moves by the federal government to deport. With the commutation, again, as the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the island said, if they come back and it's not enforced, there's no enforcement powers for them to prevent them from coming back, then of course that policy is going to be flawed. And it's popular. It's popular now because the emotions that are behind it to see that these individuals are constantly at risk in getting in trouble, and plus the financial burden of the Department of Corrections housing them. But I think a policy should be fully explored when it comes down to does it make an impact, as Therese Trelawney said, on crime? Will it reduce the deterrence factor for this? That's my position on it.
Thank you very much, sir. All right. It's interesting that you drew this question. This is for Senator Michael Siniglis. I think we're going to get a collective bath in the room. How do you feel about Guam's finances in light of the recent borrowing and bonds that have occurred over the past few years? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds. Please be ready to go. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so when you're running an operation, you know, you got to run your operation with the existing cash flow that you have. If you're going to continue to borrow in order to fund your operation, you're going to go under eventually. Now, borrowing has multiple forms. We can borrow by going to the bond market and using that to kite our operational expenses. Or we can borrow in the less traditional ways, but everyone here is most likely familiar with them. You can borrow by delaying payments to your vendors and making them wait and using that cash in order to continue kiting your operations. You can borrow by, in the government's case, not paying your tax refunds. Or in the case of a business, it'll be not paying for discounts for people who are buying products from your business. And those are all different forms of borrowing. And if you're going to take from tax refunds to run your operations, if you're going to take from vendors and withhold their payments to run your operations, if you're going to go into the bond market and borrow money to fund your operations, then why do you keep increasing your operational expenses? You know, the governor in the most recent budget sent down a budget to the legislature in February that was $55 million more than what we eventually passed. And that was $55 million on top of what we already couldn't pay for in the previous fiscal year. None of the financial experts in the government, and I'll use experts very loosely, ever told the legislature that we were running a deficit. Never told the legislature that we're running a deficit. And it's not until we get audited 9 months later that all of a sudden we find out that we're short. We cannot borrow to run operations, and we need to prudently manage our cash in order to be able to make sure that we're not doing that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Will Castro, same question. How do you feel about Guam's finances in light of the recent borrowing of bonds that have occurred over the past few years?
How appropriate. So first of all, I'm the chairman of the Hospital Management Advisory Team. Just for the record, I never advocated for further borrowing or the implementation of a bond. But I will be very clear. I'm not going to mince words, and I'm sick and tired of people avoiding the hard question. You can't just float a bond, find some external source of financing to pay yesterday's power bill without due consideration to the need to grow the top line. And you don't do that by paying the power and water bill. We're complaining that we're not generating enough revenues at the hospital. There's a federal paradigm that needs to be broken, but until then, the plea was to build infrastructure so they can generate more money. And I'll tell you what, this time I'll tell you what, I got no problems not borrowing, but I got a problem when you can't tell the people who have gone to their face that you're going to shut down the hospital. I will not allow, if I'm given the privilege to serve, this body to shut that hospital down because we can't continue to fund operations. I think they're doing a great job. The real question is, can we put in the right amount of money to give them the tools and the facilities they need to grow the top line? And yes, I agree, there's opportunity to collect money, but until we do that, we can't allow them to languish. That's our moral and it's our fiduciary responsibility. So, how appropriate. Any other question relative to bond financing? I'll punt to maybe Mr. Fernando. But that's my passionate position on the issue of public health.
Thank you. That's not the way it works. Selena Nelson, same question to you. How do you feel about Guam's finances in light of the recent borrowing of bonds that have occurred over the past few years?
Okay, just to clarify, the bond borrowing situation, the reason why I stand against continuously borrowing is because essentially you're putting us into debt. Now, I know that the workers at GMH are doing a very good job at those things, but we're not focusing on that issue. We're focusing on whether we can continue to borrow bonds arbitrarily for funding other reasons. So here's what I propose. We need to really take look at a bigger picture when we need funding. The current Section 30 funding that we receive is from our retirees and from the active duty military taxes that come here. But we need to look at creative ways on how we can include Section 30 funding for those that actually train here. We have now 18,000 military personnel training on Guam. None of that money goes back to the government of Guam. That money goes to their base station. Several years ago, we had an aircraft carrier coming towards our waters whose base station was in Hawaii. That Section 30 funding went back to Hawaii. We need to start making demands with the federal government saying, hey, you're going to use our land, you're going to use our water, you're going to use our airspace, well, you need to pay. We need to start looking at things in a larger scale. We cannot just continue being tunnel vision saying, we gotta borrow, we gotta borrow, we gotta borrow. We need to think outside of the box and we need to find solutions and take action as a legislative body with the executive branch, fighting with Congress. Thank you.
I'm going to give you 20 seconds, and only 20 seconds, to answer this question. You mentioned that you felt some of the borrowing was arbitrary.
Well, I'm saying this because we're using the bond borrowing for different things, right? We're using it to pay vendors. We're using it to pay salaries.
Do you feel that's arbitrary?
I believe that it's a little bit reckless. I believe that when you borrow money, you use it and you invest it so you can get a return.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric Palacios, how do you feel about Guam's finances in light of the recent borrowing and bonds that have occurred over the past few years?
You know, at home I really try to live my life debt-free, and you know, unfortunately that's not how it works in the government Guam. When I need to save money, I can disconnect my cable, disconnect my phone, you know, limit certain things. In the government, there are absolutely essential services that we must provide, and you know, when interest rates are favorable, I think it does make sense to go out into the bond market to get monies that we need, especially if the root of the problem is paying for past due obligations. What I think we really should start focusing on is the unfunded federal mandates reform act, where we have to meet the threshold of $100 million before the federal government even begins to consider reimbursing us for a lot of the impositions that it expects us to carry out based on mandates that they've implemented with the stroke of, you know, broad stroke of a pen, whether it be EITC, Medicare, Medicaid, impacts to schools, and even to the Department of Corrections. I think that's where, if we didn't have to pay, or if we're at least adequately reimbursed to carry out a lot of the programs that they expect us to carry out without the proper funding source to do so, we certainly would be in a much better financial position, and I truly believe that we would not be required to really go out into the borrowing market as much as maybe we have, except to pay for what we had to do, which was pay for past obligations.
Thank you, sir. Senator Brandt Creed, same question to you. How do you feel about Guam's finances in light of recent borrowing and bonds? How do you feel about Guam's finances in light of the recent borrowing and bonds?
I heard the question. I heard it earlier. I think first you got to figure out how we got there. We pay $125 million in refunds. That's our projected refund. We pay $200 million in PPPs. Now, when Mr. Palacios just spoke about the EITC, our EITC unfunded mandate went from $11 million to $56 million. Those are all unfunded. We pay $119 a day for convicted criminals at DOC. We're at over 800 offenders at DOC, which is a state of emergency. We also have a federal cloud over our head, a federal receivership for DOC. We had to infuse $5 million Department of Corrections in our last budget to update their medical facility. So there's a lot that you have to talk about. And then you talk about the hospital. You cannot just turn your back on these people who need health care. You cannot turn your back. It's unconstitutional. We expend about $150 million a year in compact impact monies. We get reimbursed only about $15 million. So there's not a balance there. And until we find that balance, hate to say it, but we're going to have to find creative ways to keep this government moving forward. And that's how we're doing it. But I can tell you this, I just read something and confirmed it, that $66 million in tax refunds just went up. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about here today, this prison, the $5 million, we pay for it. Just people in this room pay for that.
Thank you, sir. Amanda Bloss, same question to you. How do you feel about Guam's finances in light of the recent borrowing and bonds that have occurred over the past few years?
Do I like seeing our government in debt? Of course not. But these problems that we have to take care of, paying tax refunds on time, addressing the underfunding of the hospital, these aren't problems that happened overnight. It's time to address them now. Now, it's no secret that we borrow year after year for the hospital, and it's so easy to say that we're not going to borrow for the hospital, especially sitting behind this table right now. But when you're in the waiting room of our island's only public hospital, as I'm sure all of you in this room have been, it's not so easy to say, okay, we were not going to borrow. We're not just talking about finances. Yes, it's a big part, but we're also talking about the welfare of our people. And as we continue to make sure that we take care of our people, that's what we have to do.
Thank you. All right. how can we encourage more locals to move back to Guam after obtaining education skills elsewhere? This question is for Ms. Mary Torres. Once again, how can we encourage more locals to move back to Guam after obtaining education skills elsewhere?
It's a very difficult proposition, and I know that I deal with it personally because I have a daughter who left Guam after high school to attend college, got 2 advanced degrees after that, and has a very lucrative position right now. Coming back to Guam, there's no incentive because there's no like kind of job for her here. That's not to say that she wouldn't benefit from being on Guam. The culture here is fantastic. The quality of life in terms of your connectivity to people and issues is very advantageous here in terms of you being in touch with others and being able to impact lives directly. I think what we need to do, and I recall in the 1970s when my father first became governor and Guam was on the verge of growing. We had our first direct route from Tokyo to Guam. It started the tourism industry on Guam. We had urban renewal coming in. We were looking at our very first civilian-owned hospital. A lot of things were on the cusp of growing. And the one thing that was incentivizing people to come here was A, there were jobs, and B, the climate was conducive. It was conducive for people to come and work. It was also conducive for investors to come. So I think if we are going to expect people to come back to Guam, we really have to clean house. We have to have a clean government, a government that we know is not corrupt, that is not on a favoritism thing, and that it is easy to do business here and that you will prosper. I think first and foremost, we set the environment again, clean it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Servino, same question. How can we encourage more locals to move back to Guam after obtaining the education and skills elsewhere?
Thank you for the question, because I'm actually one of those individuals. I actually live in California. I still have a home there, but I relocated back to Guam because, again, there was a need, there was a calling. I was asked to come back to help build, again, the high standards of living for our people and advocate for those that are vulnerable. I think if we provide incentives and increase the compensation level, a lot of positions here, because it's very competitive, and I'm one of those, I kept salary cut of about $25,000 to come here. But you know, it's not all about money. Sometimes we need to express to our people that they have to come back. They have to come back and give back to the community. And you know, the lifestyle here is different from the mainland. It's all really hectic and rushed back there. Here it's a lot easier. We need to, my kids are all coming back, and I see that they appreciate the fact that, you know, they're giving back to the community and they're learning the values of how we were raised. And we focus on that and try to get them to come back, to look at that more than just the money. You know, I think it will eventually go up as you look at the Hayes studies and the compensation level. But again, I have like 6 positions I'm trying to recruit from my agency, but the compensation is so competitive, it's really hard to recruit people. And we need to build capacity here in Guam, again, for our youth to build that level and get the university as pipeline to fill these positions, especially the skilled positions. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Underwood, same question to you. How can we encourage more locals to move back to Guam and after obtaining education and skills elsewhere?
Thank you so much. I've been waiting to be asked another question. Anyway, you know, I know that when people leave, it's for personal reasons. Some of them, it's because they didn't have the opportunity here. For our elders, it may be because they're not sure about our health care. But nonetheless, I think it just starts with each one of us. We have to let them know the Guam story. Guam right now is not the same as it was 10 years ago or even 15 years ago. We have improved, yes, we have a lot of things that we have to do to improve the services for the government of Guam. But you know what? We have great businesses here, and we have access to practically a lot of the comforts that are being offered in the mainland. So I think that we individually just need to tell the Guam story. Tell them great things that are happening. And it really just begins with each one of us.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tommy Morrison, how can we encourage more locals to move back to Guam after obtaining education and skills elsewhere?
Certainly good availability of good paying employment, and that could be achieved by more industries that can tie in with our existing industries. But I want to point out too that the University of Guam and GCC have been doing an outstanding job at expanding their existing degree programs, creating more degree programs, aligning them with what are the needs in our public and private sector. And we're seeing that as a result. We're actually seeing it in the enrollment numbers. So I think it would be, instead of trying to find a way to entice them back, we're doing a good job in investing in our higher institutions of learning. And we're seeing that. I've gone to every high school graduation, and what it used to be, of the top 10 of each class, you will see a majority of that looking for education file. Well, now we're seeing, I think many people, even in our private schools, we're seeing that more than 50% of those top 10s are now looking at our local university, GCC, for higher learning. I think that's coming in the efforts that we've been making to align our students with what's available in our public and private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Joseph Augustine, same question to you. How can we encourage more locals to move back to Guam after obtaining an education elsewhere?
Hello? All right, here you go. You know, Guam spends a lot of money for tourism. Why haven't we invested exactly what Senator Underwood brought up? Why aren't we telling the Guam story? And at the same token, like many have mentioned today, why don't we fix up our finances? You know, the senators today will tell you that, you know, they looked over the budget. Why did they trim the budget more? You know, if you got a vacancy out there, why didn't you bring it down? Bring down the money, have more money, do an investment, take a look at our young professionals on Guam. Let's take care of you guys here in Guam. And you know what? The story will leak out to the mainland and they'll come back to Guam. You know, it's like watching the movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they'll come. I believe in that. Let's just tell the story.
Thank you. Senator Tom Adams, same question to you.
Thank you. Thank you. That question certainly is very relevant to me because I was gone for 14 years before I decided to come back. And it was not a question of if I'm going to come back, it was a question of when. And when I decided to come back, it was because I felt that I was ready, I had gotten enough tools to be able to come back and contribute to the community. But I think that for our people to come back, if they have left to go get an education and training so that they can satisfy that need for self-actualization, then we have to have an economy that can absorb those new skills. And you can only do that by having a vibrant economy and that will provide the necessary jobs. That college-trained individual is not going to come back here to operate a paper shop. So that's going to be very important. It's also going to be very important that I'm going to want to start my young family, and I'm not going to, but I have to put them into an environment that at least affords some level of quality of life. And that means having reliable water and power, having good roads, having good ports of entry that will guarantee that the 90% of the goods we consume can be brought in and processed through efficiently. So we as a government need to create our environment to provide that quality of life and to provide for a vibrant economy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jermaine Alerta, same question. How do we attract people who've gone off island for education and services?
So about 2004, I was with a group of students from the University of Guam, and they came to me because I worked in the legislature, and they were primarily biology students at the University of Guam, and they started the Guam Medical Society Junior Chapter. And we looked at some laws, and they're, you know, these are people who were aspiring to become medical professionals because there was a need for them here on Guam, and they looked at some of the university programs such as ProTech also the Merit Scholarship, where the government helps pay for students to go off island and acquire further education or hone their skills. And they were focused mainly on bringing back doctors who knew the island, who we call it culturally competent professionals. So they know the island, but there was no way for them to afford it. And there was a program in the books right now, it's called the OMTI program, and it set aside money over 25 years ago to provide this type of service. So we tried to resurrect it, we were unsuccessful. But it was strengthening programs such as ProTech so that we can send these people off island, and in turn they have to get government service. So I have a friend who is that, it took him almost 10 years, but he's a doctor practicing in Florida, and he's making his way back here to work here on Guam because he felt it was his duty to give back to Guam. So if we can incentivize it, the service back to the island, then I think we're making progress on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Break the mold a little and maybe wake up the panel with some polling questions. Okay, here's one that actually came up with membership. The U.S. presidential race. Okay, how many of you support Hillary Clinton by a show of hands? Hillary Clinton. How many of you support Donald Trump?
Go Bush. Did you say George Bush?
How many of you support Gary Johnson? That's not a surprise. All right, thank you. All right, of those of you that support Hillary Clinton, how many of you supported Bernie Sanders instead? And of those of you voting for Trump, how many of you prefer Ted Cruz? Thank you. That was fun, right? You're gonna have to answer me that later, by the way. Okay, on the issue of self-determination, this is a question brought in from the crowd. By a show of hands, how many of you would support the status quo? Give me a second. All right, unincorporated territory of the United States of America. How many of you would support statehood? How many of you would support independence? And how many of you would support free association? And how many of you would support another status that I might have forgotten? Did I cover all of them? I think I did. Okay. And we'll get some more questions from the audience. Let's see. On the issue of public transportation, how do you plan to improve public transportation for Guam? Let's see, who haven't we heard from so much? Mr. Servino, can you address that question for us?
Thank you. I think that's one of the biggest priorities I have right now, is the public transportation. As we look at the new buses that have been purchased, the vans, accessible lifts, it's really sad that we don't have the drivers for that. We really need to build the capacity of the Guam Regional Transit Authority so they can have some leeway in the procurement process. We go back to the procurement process. A lot of times that can be a challenge and a barrier. We need to also look at adequate funding for the Guam Regional Transit Authority and hire staff that can man those and take on those implementation process. And we need training for them. They really need to be trained. A lot of them are still not too well versed on the ADA, the requirements of the accessibility requirements. So we need to build their capacity. That's how I would try to address it.
Thank you, sir. This lends itself to another question in terms of economic studies and loss of productivity. With something as simple as inefficient streetlights. Do any of the candidates have a plan to address the streetlight situation? Let me be more specific. Where they're on timers as opposed to sensors. Where you're at a streetlight for 2 minutes even though nobody's coming in the opposite direction. Senator Tom Adams.
Yes. Traffic light?
Traffic lights, sorry, street lights. Traffic lights. Traffic lights, not street lights.
Oh. No, I don't have a question.
No plan to address.
Can I try that one, Louis?
Actually,
you know what's interesting is this goes back to government and what we're doing. We have, right now, Parsons, we have an engineer that comes out here. You see these guys, sometimes they're in their vest. They're down there, they open the cupboard, you know, they work on synchronizing the lights. It really is more about a traffic management plan and just doing what we already have and doing it better and doing it well. Now we have all these power interruptions. That's what's causing this need to reset every time. So a lot of times it's really not necessarily about anything novel. It's about doing what we're already doing better and improving the system we have. But the fact of the matter, we do have right now somebody under contract, you know, to be doing that. They're, from what I understand from the DPW director, they're training local talent as well and local people to be able to do that, because there's a guy that comes up from off island every couple of months, and that's what he does. He goes around the island, checks all the cupboards, makes sure everything's working, and then our guys here try to keep up with that when he's not here. So it's just a matter of building capacity and having a good traffic management plan.
Actually, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to another question. Chris brought up a good point about the current situation with the Guam Power Authority. And I'll direct this to Senator Tina Barnes. What do you plan on doing about the current problems with GPA?
You know, Logan, I just had 2 visits from 2 different solar energy and renewable energy companies coming to our office. And as we look at the situation on hand, I think it is important that instead of borrowing more money to fix, is look at the modern technology that's out there and try to integrate it with the system that we have in place today. Because as we know, technology is growing faster than the speed of light, and we need to be able to step up to the plate to get the expertise that we already have here on Guam and work with them. I have 2 companies this week, last 3 days, that have come and said, Senator, we have some answers. We don't think GPA should be spending more money to fix. They should be sharing the ideas that we have to offer. And I think that's very crucial, is bringing in these companies that we have today, the expertise that we have here on Guam. Santa Mosa.
Thanks, Senator. Same question to Mr. Fred Bordalio. What do you plan on doing about the current problems with GPA?
Thank you for asking that. You know, in the Naval Postgraduate School, when I was there, one of the biggest topics of discussion is critical infrastructure protection, the vulnerabilities, and everything is risk-based, and how you protect everything from our port of authority, our port of entries, to include the utilities and telecommunications. One of the things I want to do as a senator is working with the Guam Power Authority and actually the Navy, you know, and the military installations, where their power sources, because they have an investment into it also. You know, without a reliable power system, then the military can't operate and function and do their missions. So it has to be a joint partnership between government of Guam and the military to share resources and to ensure that they strengthen the power and utility system, not just the power, but including the water utility, the water system also.
Yes, sir. New question. The 5-year lease law on public land, should it be repealed? All in favor, raise your hands, please. Should it be repealed? Should it be repealed?
Are you talking about the new commercial leasing?
I'm not sure. It's a question from the crowd.
Yes. I was the one that introduced it. That's on the commercial.
All right. Senator Hunter, maybe you could inform us on the commercial.
So I was the one that introduced that particular law, simply on the principle that if land has to be, public land has to be leased out for more than 5 years, that really requires some dialogue with the legislature for approval. Now, the current law basically says that if an investment is going to be made that's going to require more than 5 years in order to recover that investment, then the very least that the law asks for is transparency. That we make it very clear that we're taking this piece of land and it's going to be leased out for a number of years for a certain purpose. Whereas we've found cases before that, you know, after the contract has been signed, that it's gonna return to the government 50 years later, that's when we find out about it. So all the law is basically asking for is, if you need to go into a long-term lease, fine, but we need to put those details up front now to make sure we agree with it.
Thank you, sir. And I guess that begs the question, should it be repealed?
No.
You posit no. By show of hands, how many say yes? Okay, Chris Wing is, why?
I think for the very reason that was just discussed, the legislature has a say in every final document that goes through in terms of land and land use. And I think the major issue here is it's not business friendly for investors who are going to put down sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars and they got to recoup their investment. There is no business person in this room right now and business people that you work for that would see through that business plan as being sound. The other thing is, and this is one statement I want to make so that all of you hopefully take away this as you leave and if you conduct this forum. The legislature is the most powerful body of government on this island. You can enact a law and repeal it the next day. The fact of the matter is, if we're doing our job right, and if we truly have the interests of Guam at heart, there's really no thing that we can't undo that we do. But at the end of the day, when something has to come before us, and we have to deliberate sound policy and sound investment, then that's the time and that's the place where we should be doing and conducting that business. And so that's just my opinion. We have the final say, especially with government, of course, on government land and investment, but right now that's not business friendly.
Thank you. And one final question from the crowd. We actually truncated this question. Question is, what can be done to improve workmen's compensation, the workmen's compensation system on Guam? What's wrong with it? Okay, let me go into the question. As you may know, private sector worker compensation benefits are supposed to replace an injured employee's right to sue for medical coverage. As the law stands now, disability payments are less than minimum wage, and the local Workers' Compensation Administration does not enforce the law. Do any of you have an opinion on this matter or have a proposed solution so that injured employees have a meaningful remedy? Mr. A.J. Malahaja.
I actually used, hello?
Time's up.
I actually have used workers' comp, and the red tape that you have to go through to utilize workers' comp is it's a nightmare. And when you're not feeling well and you're hurting and you need to be able to use workers' comp, you shouldn't have to go through all the red tape that it takes to utilize that. That's one issue. Another issue is if you are in a car accident, you know, you're in a government vehicle and somebody hits you and the insurance company pays out, you know, a settlement to you, you shouldn't have to reimburse the government of Guam for that part of the money that you received from that settlement. That settlement should be yours. It shouldn't go back to the government of Guam. I mean, I think that there's a disconnect when it comes to workers' comp. I think it's there to help the employee get through what they're going through, and I don't think that they should have to compensate the government of Guam for the money that was spent.
Thanks, sir. I'm actually going to give our membership the last 10 minutes to meet with you and discuss any of the issues, or if there's any of the things that you want to address. Maybe there was an unfair question that I posed to you. I'm taking notes over here, so I'd be more than happy to hang around and discuss those with you. But I'd like to just thank you all for coming and answering our questions today, and maybe we could give the panel a round of applause. Thank you very much for the Guam Young Professionals. So now I guess we'll just have a little bit of a mixer here for the last 10 minutes. It's 1:30. Thank you.